It was still dark in Tehran. The city was quiet, the way it always is in the early hours before dawn, before the call to prayer, before the traffic, before the noise of another ordinary day. But February 28th, 2026 was not going to be an ordinary day. At approximately 5 in the morning, Iran Standard Time, the sky above the Iranian capital suddenly turned violent. Missiles rained down on key targets across the city and beyond. And somewhere inside the compound known as Beit Rahbari, the House of Leadership, a man who had held absolute power over 86 million people for nearly 4 decades took his final breath. And Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was dead. He was 86 years old. He died at his workplace, reportedly while carrying out his duties, killed by a direct airstrike on his office within his own compound. His daughter, his son-in-law, and a grandchild were also reported killed in the same strike in a single morning. The most powerful man in Iran, a man who had outlasted revolutions, sanctions, assassinations, and the collapse of empires, was gone. The world first heard about it not from Iranian state media, not from a diplomat, and not from a military official. The world heard it from Donald Trump. The 47th President of the United States posted a message on his Truth Social platform in the early hours of Saturday morning, confirming that Khamenei had been killed in the joint United States and Israeli military operation. The operation, now being called Operation Epic Fury, had been launched in the pre-dawn hours of February 28th, targeting 24 provinces across Iran in a simultaneous massive wave of strikes. Trump described the operation as the beginning of something historic, a chance, he said, for the Iranian people to reclaim their country. For hours after Trump's post went live, confusion and chaos gripped the information space. Iranian state media initially said nothing concrete. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi told the world that both Khamenei and President Masoud Pezeshkian were alive, adding the cautious qualifier, "as far as I know." Iranian news agencies Tasnim and Mehr, both close to the government, published reports saying the supreme leader was steadfast and firm in commanding the field. Yet the Iranian foreign ministry's spokesperson went further, insisting that Khamenei was safe and sound. But those statements began to crumble as the hours passed and the silence from official channels grew louder. Then came the satellite images. Photographs taken by Airbus showed thick black smoke rising from Khamenei's compound in northern Tehran. Several buildings within the compound appeared severely damaged. Israeli intelligence sources told multiple Western news organizations that Khamenei's body had been located. 4 Israeli security officials, independently briefed on the situation, told reporters that the supreme leader had been killed in the strike on his Tehran compound. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke publicly about growing signs that Khamenei had been eliminated and said that many senior figures had been taken out in the sweeping operation. Then, at around 5 in the morning Iran Standard Time on Sunday, March 1st, Iranian state broadcaster IRIB finally confirmed what much of the world had already come to believe. The broadcaster reportedly broke into tears as he read the official statement. The supreme leader of Iran has reached martyrdom, the broadcaster announced. Iranian state news agency IRIB's Telegram account posted, "The supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution of Iran was martyred at his workplace in the Beit Rahbari. He was carrying out his assigned duties and present at his place of work at the moment of martyrdom, and this attack took place in the early hours of Saturday morning." The semi-official outlet Fars news agency confirmed that Khamenei was killed while at his office inside the compound that had served as the center of Iranian political power for decades. Iran announced 40 days of national mourning. To understand the weight of what happened on that Saturday morning, you have to understand who Ali Khamenei was and what he represented. He was born on April 19, 1939 in Mashhad, a city in northeastern Iran, into a family of clerics. He studied theology in Qom, where he sat in the classes of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the man who would later lead the 1979 Islamic Revolution that overthrew the Shah and transformed Iran forever. Khamenei was not a peripheral figure in that revolution. He was in the middle of it. He had been arrested 6 times by the Shah's secret police. He had survived an assassination attempt in 1981 that left his right hand permanently paralyzed. He had served as Iran's president for 2 terms in the 1980s during one of the most brutal chapters in the country's modern history, the Iran-Iraq War, which killed hundreds of thousands of people on both sides. When Ayatollah Khamenei died in 1989, many expected a more senior cleric to take the position of supreme leader. Khamenei was not even at the rank of Grand Ayatollah at the time, a fact that made his elevation deeply controversial among some within the clerical establishment. But the political machinery of the Islamic Republic moved quickly, and Khamenei was installed as supreme leader. He would hold that position for 36 years and 6 months, making him the longest-serving head of state in the Middle East at the time of his death, and the longest-serving Iranian ruler since the Shah himself. In those 3.5 decades, Khamenei built a system of almost total control. As supreme leader, he was commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He controlled the judiciary. He controlled state media. He had final authority over all major government decisions. He directed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which had grown under his watch into not just a military force, but an economic empire with stakes in industries across Iran. He oversaw Iran's nuclear program, a program that became the source of constant international tension, years of sanctions, multiple rounds of failed negotiations, and ultimately a significant reason for what happened on the morning of February 28th. His foreign policy was defined by confrontation. He built and sustained what he called the axis of resistance, a network of allied militias and movements across the Middle East, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and various armed groups in Iraq and Syria. He supported Russia during its war in Ukraine. He oversaw Iranian missile and drone programs that transformed the region's military balance. Under his leadership, Iran fired ballistic missiles at Israel, an act that just a few years earlier would have seemed almost unimaginable. He described Israel as a cancer, called for its destruction repeatedly, and his anti-Israel and anti-American rhetoric was a constant feature of Iranian public life for 3 decades. But Khamenei also presided over immense domestic repression. Thousands of protesters were killed under his watch. The Mahsa Amini protests of 2022, which began after a young woman died in morality police custody for allegedly not wearing her hijab correctly, saw a brutal crackdown that drew worldwide condemnation. The 2025 to 2026 protests that preceded his death were among the most intense the country had ever seen. Chants of death to Khamenei, and this year is the year of blood, Khamenei will be overthrown, had become common on the streets of Iranian cities. Women were photographed lighting cigarettes with burning portraits of the supreme leader, an act of open, defiant contempt for a man who had built an entire state around demanding reverence. In the immediate aftermath of the strikes, reactions across Iran were dramatically divided. In some parts of Tehran, there were reports of cheering. Witnesses described people throwing open their windows, playing music, celebrating in ways that would have been unthinkable the day before. Exiled opposition leader Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, called on Iranian security forces to stand down and join the Iranian people in what he called a transition. He urged them not to sink with what he described as Khamenei's crumbling regime. In other parts of the country and the region, there was mourning, anger, and a deep sense of uncertainty about what comes next. On the other side of the world, in Washington, Donald Trump was direct and unapologetic. He called Khamenei one of the most evil people in history. He described his killing as justice. Justice, he said, for Americans and others killed by Iran and Iran-backed groups over the decades. He called on Iranians to take over their government once the strikes concluded. He urged IRGC members and police to peacefully surrender in exchange for immunity, warning those who did not comply of imminent consequences. He told NBC News in a phone interview that he believed the reports of Khamenei's death were correct and that a large number of Iranian leaders had also been killed. He said, in his characteristic style, that most of the people who make all the decisions were gone. And what comes next? That is the question that now hangs over not just Iran, but the entire Middle East. Under Iran's constitution, when a supreme leader dies, an interim 3-member council takes over. This council consists of the president, the head of the judiciary, and a jurist of the Guardian Council. At the same time, the Assembly of Experts, a body of 88 Islamic clerics, is responsible for selecting a new supreme leader. But Israel claims its strikes also targeted and killed 7 senior defense and intelligence officials and struck 30 top military and civilian leaders overall. The chain of command has been severely disrupted. Who survives, who holds power, and who, if anyone, can hold the Islamic Republic together remains deeply unclear. One senior official believed to have survived is Ali Larijani, secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council and a longtime confidant of Khamenei. Experts at institutions like the Stimson Center in Washington say Iran has long had contingency plans for exactly this scenario, including the possibility that the country has already been operating under some form of collective leadership in the background. But planning for the death of a supreme leader in peacetime is very different from managing it in the middle of an active, large-scale military assault that has struck 24 provinces and reportedly killed at least 201 people in a single day. The strikes targeted not just leadership. Israel struck ballistic missile facilities and aerial defense systems. 2 schools were hit, killing over 100 people, a devastating development that drew sharp international criticism, even from those who oppose the Iranian regime. The human cost of Operation Epic Fury in all its dimensions is still being counted. What is certain is that February 28, 2026, is a date that will be studied and debated for generations. A man who shaped one of the most consequential countries in the world for 36 years, who shaped wars, revolutions, regional alliances, nuclear negotiations, and the daily lives of tens of millions of people, was killed at his desk in his office while reportedly doing his job at 5 in the morning in the city he had dominated for decades. The silence after the missiles fell in Tehran that morning was not really silence. It was the sound of a world trying to figure out what happens next.